This is what it looks like, typically, a peaceful march of the masses, and a lot of youngsters joining in the beat. Actually, it is to mourn a grandson of the Prophet Muhammad. That is Imam Hussain, third leader of the Shias. Some things never get old, say sorrow and inspiration, the struggle for basic rights and dignity, and aspiring to betterment. Each year this country is shrouded in black to mourn Imam Hussain and companions and to honor the epic battle of Karbala. What the event inspires today and how Corona will allow a commemoration we'll be pointing to in this episode. So stay with me, Leila Faramarzi, on Iran Today. In the year 680 AD or 61 Hijra, Imam Hussain and his 72 companions were faced by what's known as the army of Yazid I. The resistance that ensued came to be known as an uprising. Mr. Tawakkoli is a writer, researcher and West Asia expert teaching at university. We got to meet him at his office in the Arts Center.
Resistance is in fact a ramification of Ashura. When you come to realize with regard to the Muslim world that the enemies of Islam, enemies of people, enemies of this geographical zone have mobilized their forces for maximum dominance, be it cultural, economic or geopolitical, upon regional nations, the common political logic, be it liberalism or nationalism, failed to find an answer. Even the most leading anti-hegemony movement, for example Marxism, which itself grew into a new force of dominance, failed to overpower capitalism and imperialism.
Imam Hussain was beheaded, as were his 72 companions, killed or taken as captive. Among those killed was Hussein's 6-month-old baby boy. This bears the question whether the resistance was pre-planned or consequential. But it happened. The blood of pure souls was shed. And under a millennium and a half later, in spite of a surge with COVID-19, mourning tents, yards and congregation halls named Hussainiyas were set up as Muharram set in. Mr. Harizavi, a cleric of rank, is Deputy for Islamic Promotion. He received us at his relevant office, a pleasant space with welcoming people.
This year, in my opinion, the observation of protocols will be between 85 to 90%, although the enemies try to show it otherwise. In other words, there might be violations in 5 gatherings out of the 105,000 gatherings across the country, but the enemies portray the 5 instances in cyberspace as if they were happening in half of all the gatherings and call for all the gatherings to be banned. This is unfair. God willing, people will be careful. We have good people. They won't allow their devotion to Imam Hussain to lead to a further spread of the disease so the enemies can take advantage.
Why do Shias hold the Tasua Ashura ceremony each year? What current events over time have kept the flame alive?
One instance is the martyrdom of Haj Qasim Soleimani, which created a huge movement in Iran and the countries in the region, as a great commander like Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis was martyred alongside him. The two great figures fought against the enemies together. Remember, after the assassination of Qasim Soleimani, people from all walks of life, tendencies, appearances, even those who didn't adhere to religious laws, came out to protest. It's exactly what we're witnessing in Lebanon, where many of Sayyid Hassan Nasrullah's followers are Christians who practice their own religion, but their political thought follows the idea of resistance.
In Iraq's holy city of Karbala alone, where Imam Hussain has been laid to rest, over 20 million Shia Muslims gather annually to pay homage. Those who can't make it commemorate the triumph of blood over the sword elsewhere over the 10-day mourning period, ending in Tasua and Ashura, the 9th and 10th days, and on Arba'in, the Imam's 40th day or 40-day martyrdom anniversary. The nation, among 200 million Shias worldwide, are black-clad at large on the 10 days and on Arba'in, the 40th commemorative day that falls into the following month of Safar. Muharram is among months labeled the haram or forbidden months when war is prohibited. In other words, Husseini resistance is meant to be peaceful. Interestingly, the Islamic resistance appears to have been more successful, perhaps even the only successful movement against the US and Israel, apparently because of its peaceful nature. Mr. Jalali, a cleric of considerable rank, gave us some of his time as well as access to a yard he has downtown, where his following congregate for religious ceremonies. This year it's been decorated no less abundantly than any time before, with motifs bringing to life the event of Ashura.
وجود مقدس امام حسین علیه السلام زمانی که مواجه میشن با
Imam Hussein's conduct in the face of enemy troops carries a social lesson. When the enemy troops were approaching, Imam Hussein did not cease to worry about their concerns, including physical health, like possible thirst. Therefore, Imam Hussein immediately ordered commanders and water distributors to supply waters to enemy troops. When we see such conducts, we can't remain indifferent towards fellow humans.
Congregations of believers are not easy to stop, and not everyone in the system cared to completely scrap the ceremony. It is a way of enlivening religious belief among youngsters, as the most popular cantors trigger their energy and thoughts. And with an economy in trouble, the nation can do with a little normalcy. Over the past 4 decades, Iranians have endured all sorts of hardship imposed by foreign powers and have demonstrated where they felt wronged by domestic authorities. But do both class as resistance?
واقعیتش این است که نقطه نهایی قیام
The fact is that the end point of the uprising is to fight the external enemy. But if you have noticed, there was some sort of influence in the government itself. As the Umayyads infiltrated the Islamic government, or the Jews somehow came and made plans, we must also rise up here against the oppression around us. As Imam Hussain himself said, his uprising was one within the Muslim Ummah. Well, the unfair developments in Khuzestan, the shortcomings which were due to some misguided measures taken there, the developments in Haftepe or Sistan and Baluchistan, all these can be approached with the spirit of demand and protest that Imam Hussain has placed in our conscience.
The outer world also closely observes the marches and mourners of Muharram and Arba'in. It's a long tale and we've plenty more to say on it, but first a quick media review with Sarah.
Hello and welcome to a new edition with me, Sarah Adema. As we are getting closer to Ashura, today we're gonna review some lessons from different media outlets. And the first one begins with Tehran Times that says, Ashura is integral part of Iranian identity. Imam Khomeini, the founder of the Islamic Republic, said back in the revolution days that the victory of the Islamic Revolution was because of Imam Hussein's uprising. He stated, we all should understand that if it had not been for the uprising of Imam Hussain alayhi salam, we would not have won. The Islamic Revolution of Iran is a reflection of Ashura and its great divine revolution. He also said that the mourning ceremonies for Imam Hussain alayhi salam played a major role in unifying the Iranian people against the Shah. In Imam Khomeini's view, the martyrdom of Imam Hussain alayhi salam, who is also known as the master of martyrs, is the main reason that preserved the Muslim countries. The later leader said, we have to see what the secret of the survival of this religion and the survival of Muslim and Shia countries is, and we should protect that secret. The biggest secret in this regard is the issue of the master of martyrs. Under Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, the leader of the Islamic Revolution, Iran continued to follow the Imam Hussein's footsteps. Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah stated in Ahl al-Bayt news agency, psychological warfare aims at fueling Lebanon's crises. Hezbollah Secretary General Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah said that the crisis in Lebanon is being deliberately exacerbated. He pointed to recent developments surrounding fuel supplies that turned into a fabricated crisis which people corresponded with, making the situation worse. During his speech at the Central Ashura commemorations, he gave several instructions to the supporters of the resistance, stressing the importance of honesty in reporting facts and not slandering or accusing anyone without evidence, and not to curse or insult anyone. He said, differences in opinion do not mean attacking others. Criticizing is one thing and attacking them is another. Whoever among the clergymen or male and female media professionals talk about politics, we have the right to respond to them, but within certain norms and not to attack them personally. He explained further, insulting and belittling is a sign of weakness, while the strong discusses and puts forward ideas and does not need to insult others. Our final lesson reads in Daily Times, Imam Hussain alayhi salam, the quintessential custodian of Islam. The painful tragedy of Karbala reminds us not to bow down before a despot and tyrant ruler, and never flinch from raising our voice against injustice, oppression, and despotism. This is what Imam Hussain alayhi salam did at the hottest and the arid plains of Karbala. To cap it all, I would quote Allama Iqbal, who paid glowing tribute to Imam Hussain in his book, The Secrets of Selflessness. He says in his book, he, meaning Hussain, annihilated despotism till the day of resurrection. The sugar of his blood brought forth the garden of liberty. For truth, he rolled in dust and blood, and thus he had fortified the foundation of Islam. The secret of Quran we have learned from Imam Hussein's example. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the founder of Pakistan, also eulogized Imam Hussain in following words: "The world is unable to present an example finer and brighter than the personality of Imam Hussain, inasmuch as he was the embodiment of love and valor and personification of sacrifice and devotion. Every Muslim should learn a lesson from his life and should receive guidance from him." And that's it for me in today's edition. I'll see you next time. And now, back to you, Layla.
Time for a short break. We'll be back in no time. We mentioned how Ashura was a mobilizing force to the axis of resistance, in turn mobilizing the region against the US and Israel, and now loose jihadism and Wahhabi and Takfiri sects. You recall General Soleimani, who was assassinated by the US just after New Year. He was instrumental in defeating Daesh or ISIS in Syria and Iraq by moving forces he likened to Imam Hussain and his small army of friends and family. In fact, he referred to Iranians as the nation of Hussain and expected them to plant the seeds of sacrifice and resisting oppressors everywhere. I asked what similarities could be found between the Islamic resistance of today and the event of Ashura.
When the Salafi and Wahhabi thought came together in the Sunni political Islam, especially its Takfiri spectrum, we witnessed the emergence of anti-religious phenomena in the Islamic world, meaning that one sect of Islam started to fight against the other faiths and sects. The Salafi Takfiris distorted the definition of the immediate and distant enemies, changing the immediate enemy from political leaders who are obedient to the West to the Shias, saying that although the distant enemies are the US and Israel, we must first go after the Shias and other faiths that don't agree with us. That's when they started to fight faiths and try to subjugate their followers, commit massacres, behead people, the exact approach taken by the Umayyads. Therefore, all those who followed the thought of Ashura and the ideas of Imam Hussain came forward. Their beliefs have been so strong that make them give up life and enter this field. Therefore, the axis of resistance has a meaningful connection, and perhaps the deepest philosophical and fundamental connection with the uprising of Imam Hussain.
Since there's been plenty of mention of Daesh and resisting it, as well as US and Israel or US allies, well, Daesh was a monstrous terror group, and among groups created or backed by the US when the time was right. They're a means of using religion against religion, or getting religion to shoot itself in the foot. This has been evident in the actions of Daesh against fellow Muslims even. How does that promote the image or following of Islam? Daesh, which was, and the MEK or Iran's Mujahideen known as the Hypocrites and the Al Saud dynasty are all aligned against the Islamic resistance. The enemy is equipped with every dark force, and Iran cannot stop its regional policy. In fact, it calls the war on terror a holy war, while differentiating between martyrdom and suicidal acts of terror. The history of Islam is 1,400 years old and more. Now, there's discrepancies to be seen even in political accounts of the day. But all sects agree on the ill done the descendants of the Prophet and the suffering of Imam Hussain and companions. How we apply the lesson to the world of today, though, matters much. I went down to Parliament to hear how from a Miss Lajavardi, an MP on the Cultural Committee.
If
only we can picture and retell those stories, they have so many beautiful truths that we can learn a whole life lesson from. A lesson of endurance, self-sacrifice and devotion, how to come out victorious in the face of difficulties. We can pass them on, but unfortunately not enough work has been done to recount the story artistically. Each and every person in the story can be characterized. For example, Zuhair, who wasn't involved in the issues at all but 10 near that of Imam Hussain. How he got involved or what was his wife's role in his redemption and martyrdom, these all have stories that we can learn life lessons from.
Iran's method is the resistance against foreign forces in the region and their strongholds, especially the ones slowly wiping the holy shrines and Palestine off the map, Israel. Today, resistance on another front is also of paramount importance. That is with the JCPOA revival talks in Vienna, which began in April. They're in limbo, as Western parties to the deal, especially the US, are drawing talks out to get Iran to finally buckle down under the pressure of US sanctions. They think Iran may sign a JCPOA 2 or JCPOA Plus this way, but Iran hasn't backed down an inch and is not likely to do so, with the Ashura anniversary serving as a reminder to resistance just weeks before the 7th round of Vienna talks.
There
are many freethinkers in the world like Gandhi who had no religious affiliation with Islam but sanctified Imam Hussain and honored him as their leader. This is true in Muslim countries both amongst Shiites and Sunnis. Imam Hussain is influential and inspiring as a descendant of Prophet Muhammad and a great martyr. This has been the case for years, and we believe it will continue to be so in the future and will make more important impacts in human civilization.
Iran's support for Palestinian groups has been a key feature in spearheading pro-resistance and pan-Islamic solidarity. Groups such as Hamas, Islamic Jihad and the Secular Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. Iran's support for and by the Axis stems from its revolutionary ideology of wanting to be a cause, not just a country. For and since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, Iran's leaders have legitimized acts of resistance and uprising if recognized to be anti-oppression. Well, the 8-year war of the 80s waged on Iran by Iraq is an unquestionable example. In drawing on the Ashura narrative of the victims voiceless but standing, perhaps hoping for time to set the record straight, this country interestingly did this. When Iran accepted the UN Resolution 598 for the ceasefire with Iraq, its substantial demand was not war reparations, but to be recognized as the victim of invasion, and that it finally achieved.
After a nation rises up, if it persists and values its uprising and believes in it, the uprising turns to resistance. If the resistance continues, it will change to endurance and become long-lasting. In our opinion, the Iranian people's uprising turned into resistance, then took the form of endurance, and now has been internalized to the point where they exercise perseverance in the face of all the hardships and sanctions and choose choose their uprising over giving up. Between resistance and surrender, they choose the former.
It was the Islamic faith that drove our youngsters during the 8-year war. If there were another war to break out now, what do you think would drive them?
As a historian who has authored the biology of many martyrs and has been at the war front, I would say that those who were today fighting Daesh have done much more sacrifice than what we did. Those who are fighting Daesh in Syria have much stronger faith than our generation. We really envy them and we feel that we are distant from them.
Another example is resistance against Israel's invasion of Lebanon in 1982. And in case you're wondering how it all started, revolutionary Shiism emerged in the 1960s in response to global anti-colonial movements. It centered on resistance against oppression with a look to Shia fighters and martyrdom, and by drawing on the Karbala metaphor. To Iran as a state, the tale is more than a script for passion plays or even history books. The post-revolution constitution commands support for the oppressed and Muslims of the world, and it's claimed to have been inspired by the ordeal of Imam Hussain and companions. How bravely Imam Hussain might have fought would not matter if his only intention were to score a battlefield win, because he was surrounded by an army attacking on all sides with spears, swords and arrows, and eventually Shimr ruthlessly beheaded him, thirsty and heavily wounded. But not to fear, because words carry far and long, and that's all a legacy needs, to be related and learned from. And this is where Zainab, peace be upon her, comes in.
After Imam Hussain and his companions are martyred in the scene of Ashura, their enemies take Hazrat Zainab as a captive and chain her, taking the captives from city to city in the worst possible way until they reach the Levant. They cheer to humiliate the family of Imam Hussain, but the exact opposite of what they wanted happened, because Hazrat Zainab was an orator so skillful that people said it was as if Imam Ali was speaking when he delivered a speech. While giving a speech in Yazid's court, she commanded everyone to silence, and all the participants in the majestic court of Yazid immediately became silent to listen to her sermons. Her speech made Yazid's family, who was sitting behind a veil, cry and oppose him. Her sermons were so powerful that his rule didn't last long after.
The merging of the Islamic Revolution and the resistance movement with the ideals of the Ashura uprising can be seen in Chapter 10 on Foreign Policy, Article 152. That bases the country's foreign policy on the rejection of any kind of domination, the preservation of all-inclusive independence of the country, the defense of the rights of all Muslims, and non-alignment in relation to domineering powers.
Iran's Islamic Revolution was a phenomenon that was 15 years in the making from the year 1964 and gradually became complete. During the course of time, the leadership found its meaning and the Imam found its true place. That was made possible by Muslims with lofty aspirations and motives.
The Islamic Revolution started from religious mourning gatherings. These gatherings have been special as they recount the truths about Ashura and underline the importance of fighting against evil, although with a few fighters. This is significant as people are shown how to follow the truth in the way Imam Hussain and his companions did.
Basically, any uprising that arises to fight against oppression becomes permanent, and truth-seeking and righteous people will follow it. The uprising of Ashura is a complete tragedy due to its unique historical characteristics. It's an event in which women and children were involved from its creation until it ended in conveying the message of resistance and perseverance.
That would be the end of our account of the day. Thanks for watching from the whole team. But we've an account a week, so do join us again at the same times next week and each week after. Till then, bye.